Okay, good now afternoon, everyone. This is the Ordinance Committee meeting of January 31st, 2017. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Rouse?
Here.
Councilmember Hotchkiss? Here. Councilmember Murillo?
Here.
All righty. And we can open it up for public comment for any items not on the agenda. Is there any public comment for anybody on the agenda?
No, there's not.
Seeing none, we will move on. And Ms. Johnson, would you please read the item and tell us what you've got with information?
Options to expand smoke-free outdoor public areas. Recommendation, the Ordinance Committee provide direction to staff on whether to prohibit smoking in various outdoor public areas and make recommendations to City Council on smoking ordinance amendments.
Ms. Johnson, please.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and Ordinance Committee members, I'm Nina Johnson, Senior Assistant to the City Administrator, and today what I'm going to do is continue the Ordinance Committee's discussion to look at options to update our smoking ordinance and expand outdoor areas to be considered smoke-free. So why are we here today? Our smoking ordinance was last updated in 2002, and over the last 15 years there have been a number of changes in state law, so this is really a good time to take a good look at our smoking ordinance and revisit it. Santa Barbara recently received, it has been receiving a low grade from the American Lung Association. The Lung Association reviews policies in different cities. They assign a grade based on what policies have been enacted to look at smoking in outdoor areas. So Santa Barbara received a fairly low grade. And then nearby cities and other visitor-serving cities have adopted tougher smoking laws. Pasadena, Santa Monica have received A's. Closer to us, Ventura received a C. Monterey also a C. So those are some examples. And attachments with more grades are in the report. By way of background, Council looked at this item and discussed some potential options to update the smoking ordinance in October, and then referred it to the Ordinance Committee to really look at more of the details and discuss different outdoor areas and what recommendations to make to designate smoke-free areas and to hold public outreach. The Ordinance Committee met in November, and we conducted a public hearing. And the outreach, we looked at a number of ways of communicating with the public about options to expand smoke-free areas. Email announcements to over 5,000 businesses, postings on Nextdoor. It's a social media site for neighborhoods. There are 8,700 people on that site. City News in Brief, our e-newsletter that goes out each week. We posted information in that newsletter. The smoking issue has received pretty good media coverage overall. We directly communicated with some organizations that we thought would be affected quite a bit. Event organizers, Solstice, Old Spanish Days, environmental organizations, business organizations, and visitor-serving groups. And we've done outreach with businesses. We had one meeting in particular with bar owners who had some concerns about potential changes in their smoking. So to recap from our last Ordinance Committee meeting, we received some direction from the Ordinance Committee on initial areas to consider as smoke-free. I'll run through the list. Stearns Wharf, beaches, parks, sports fields, trails, community centers, outdoor library areas, outdoor recreation facilities, and public parking structures and lots. And then for today's meeting, we want to get into a little bit more of the other areas where we can get some direction on the harbor, the golf course, sidewalks and paseos, or possibly entryways to public buildings. I'll talk about how they're similar. Outdoor patio areas for restaurants, outdoor patio areas for bars, and public events and parades. And I think it's important to recognize that it's a full package, so specific areas, even if you gave us direction at the previous meeting for one area, they're adjacent to and have connections with other areas. So I think it's a full package in the end that we may need to make changes to. In evaluating different options, our staff team looked at a number of different approaches used in other cities, and each city has come up with something that is unique for their community, addresses their community needs. So we really wanted to focus on what makes sense for Santa Barbara's needs and what also makes sense for business owners, community organizations, business organizations, the downtown Santa Barbara and Visit Santa Barbara, to help implement the policy, because we're primarily going to be focusing on educating residents and visitors, so we want whatever we come up with to be very clear and easy to explain. There were a handful of factors that we were looking at in evaluating different approaches. First, our primary goal, limiting exposure to secondhand smoke. That was really the number one thing that we were looking at in reducing the number of areas where someone could be exposed to smoke. Reduction in litter and the associated cleanup costs, if we can reduce the number of cigarette butts that are found in public areas. Lowering the risk of fires in parks and other outdoor areas that are dry. And of course, we put Stearns Wharf already on the list, that we thought that it's very flammable and we wanted to prohibit smoking there. Also, impacts to smoking residents and out-of-town visitors. We know for sure that if we reduce the number of allowable areas for someone to smoke, that's going to pose more of a challenge to them. But we wanted to see how can we not make that too large of a burden. And then, as I was hinting of earlier, the ease of education and enforcement. This was very large in that we wanted to make sure that it's going to take a large number of people to really educate and enforce this type of policy. So we want something that's easy to explain. If someone is giving a warning for smoking, we're not envisioning a lot of citations. We want our policy to be very clear and easy to understand and to make sense for different areas of the city. We'd be focusing on a comprehensive education effort. We want to make sure that whatever eventually is drafted, that the public is aware of it, and it's not something that someone who smokes is going to run into as they're moving around, but we take steps proactively to make sure that they're knowledgeable of our law. The employees who can enforce and warn and possibly issue a citation, we have 4 positions noted here: park rangers, harbor patrol officers, community service officers, police officers. All of these positions could issue citations, but we are not envisioning that would be a typical approach. And we'd most likely be emphasizing personal responsibility and asking someone if they could put out their cigarette. And if we have a certain approach on business patios, maybe talking to the business manager to see if they could get help with somebody who's smoking, if that's the case. But really relying on information, warnings, and citations would be a last resort. Since we're talking about public education and just thinking in advance of what type of proposal we would have for smoke-free areas, there are a number of different approaches that cities have taken to educate the public depending on what their law is. And I just wanted to throw a few examples for you to have in context in your mind as we look at specific areas of the city to designate as smoke-free. We could have educational campaigns for the city being smoke-free. Larger pamphlets, decals could be made available for specific areas or for businesses. We could do a direct mailing. This is a postcard that was used in Beverly Hills, letting people know exactly what the rules are. Decorative flags or signage are possible. Street signage. These are some examples. San Luis Obispo, previous in Hermosa Beach. Carpinteria, Long Beach. It could be integrated. Our effort could be integrated in other signs that show what's prohibited in parks along the beach. In the middle section here is an example on the pier in Santa Monica where you can dispose of your cigarette, but noting that smoking is not allowed on the pier. Now turning more to honing in on the definition, There were recent changes in state law. Effective in June of last year, smoking was essentially redefined to include electronic vaping devices and also marijuana. And then in November, when Prop 64 passed, it legalized the use of non-medical marijuana and specified that smoking marijuana is not permitted in the following locations: while driving a vehicle, in any public place other than a business licensed for on-site consumption, and locations where smoking tobacco is prohibited. So what we're really doing with our efforts here is we're really buttoning it up so there's no confusion on all the locations where it's prohibited. The City Attorney's Office has looked at a number of different definitions in other ordinances, and this is a definition that was used in Santa Monica, and we preferred this definition. I'll just read it quickly. Smoke or smoking would be defined as the carrying or holding of a lighted or activated pipe, cigar, cigarette, electronic smoking device, or any other lighted or activated smoking product or equipment used to burn any tobacco products, marijuana, weed, plant, or any other combustible substance. Smoking includes emitting or exhaling the fumes or vapor of any pipe, cigar, cigarette, electronic smoking device, or any other lighted smoking equipment used for burning any tobacco product, marijuana, weed, plant, or any other combustible substance. So a comprehensive definition for smoke. And now turning into the different areas that we can get some direction on whether to designate as smoke-free: the harbor, golf course, sidewalks and paseos, or entryways to public buildings, outdoor patio areas, and then public events. Just by way of background, we have a number of large areas in the city already that are by private policy considered smoke-free: City College, the Schott Center, Earl Warren Showgrounds, UCSB, Paseo Nuevo, El Paseo, the zoo, the farmers market, and housing authority units, except El Carrillo. And I'm just running through this list so that everyone is aware of large areas that have already enacted similar policies successfully, and they're already in force. So first, the golf course. At our last meeting when we talked about designating outdoor recreational facilities, tennis courts, the lawn bowling facility as smoke-free, we wanted to make sure that we called out the golf course as an exception, because when staff reviewed the practice currently at the golf course, we wanted to make sure that we allowed smoking on the golf course, on the greens, that there's a large enough space and expanse where people are not as negatively impacted by other people's smoke, and then designate officially the driving range, the practice area, and the area near the restaurant and pro shop as smoke-free. So if we put outdoor recreational facilities in the ordinance, we wanted to call these areas out as an exception, the golf course area. The Ordinance Committee previously had talked about including public parking lots and structures, and just to confirm, because I think there were some questions that smoking in the parking lots does create a lot of litter that results in a large cleanup effort. So staff confirmed that they do want to continue the recommendation that smoking be banned in the parking lots. Now looking at our sidewalks and patios. Currently, just to review the current law, our restaurant patios, they're considered smoke-free before 10 p.m. And on 25% of the patio area, smoking is allowed after 10 p.m. So that's currently what's on the books. For outdoor bar patios, it's currently allowed at all times. So on any bar that has a patio, someone is allowed to smoke on those areas. We had a meeting with the bar owners in November, and they expressed their interest in remaining exempt from any further restrictions on their smoking in front or back patios.
Question, Ms. Murillo?
Ms. Johnson, can we go back to the last slide? Because I'm sorry, I think, was that backwards, that it's 25% before 10 p.m. and then 100% after? Okay.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Murillo.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
Okay, now I'm seeing it.
It's 25% of the seating after 10 p.m.
Okay.
and no smoking before 10 p.m.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Sorry. I was confused.
When we look at sidewalks and entryways and approaches in different cities, a number of cities use a distance from the entryway as their way of tackling the sidewalks instead of naming sidewalks specifically. If we were to designate areas within a certain distance of doors, windows, and any openings into the enclosed areas, any 20 feet, for example, in Santa Monica and Pasadena, 20 feet of building entryways must be considered smoke-free. That basically covers the sidewalk area, unless you get to a large building face where you don't have any doors or windows, and those areas you could then smoke. In Santa Monica, they've got the entryway language, and then they also prohibit smoking on 3rd Street Promenade. So they've looked at one specific area where no smoking is allowed on any of it. In Pasadena, smoking is not permitted within 20 feet of the entryway unless someone is actively passing by to another destination. So you can be in motion, and that way you don't have people bothered by groups of smokers who are congregating in one spot or sitting in a bench and smoking. So just to give you a sense of how many feet, what we would be looking at 20 feet on State Street, the State Street sidewalk is about 25 feet. So 20 feet gets you most of the sidewalk, and you could choose to designate the number of feet. Many of the sidewalks in the city are 5 to 8 feet. So that gives you a sense of the distance related to our sidewalks. And other approaches that we've talked about, prohibiting smoking in any public or private place open to the general public. So that would be a very broad smoke-free rule, but basically it would allow smoking where non-smokers are not present or not reasonably expected to arrive, given usually by the time of day. So if you were on the sidewalk at 2 in the morning and no one else is around, no one's expected to arrive, you're allowed to smoke. Or it could be the location. Maybe you're in a paseo or in an area where no one is around in the middle of the day, so someone could take a smoking break when no one is around if they found an appropriate location. So this is in place in San Luis Obispo and Carpinteria. And Carpinteria also allows, with this, designated smokers outposts, although it's our understanding they haven't designated any yet. So that would be an approved area where where smoking would be allowed. So if we look at sidewalks and paseos, if council is interested in sidewalks and paseos becoming smoke-free, then we have a number of options also then for the patio areas, maintaining the current restrictions for the patios. So I have them listed here again. I won't repeat it. Or a variation of that. So maybe it's a different time, maybe a different percentage of the seating area. A number of businesses have said 25% of the seating area is really difficult to understand based on how they've got their seating configured and how many tables they have. We could look at doing something where restaurant patios are smoke-free all the time, because we've received a lot of comments from the bar owners that they would like to continue to allow smoking, and then a number of comments from restaurants that they would like to prohibit smoking. And then another option that we thought of was also not regulating outdoor restaurant and bar patios and allowing individual businesses to create their own smoking rules for their outdoor patios. And this could include any patio that extends into the public right-of-way. We could be very clear in including in the ordinance language open-air dining or bar areas located on private and public property, including public right-of-way. So we could include language that basically allowed anyone who has an outdoor bar patio, for example, that extends into the sidewalk or paseo area, we could allow the smoking to continue. Or if we had a sidewalk and paseo restriction in place, we could also consider them sidewalk. So it's however we choose to write it, whatever direction we receive. We could go either direction. There are 42 permitted outdoor dining areas currently. So just so you have that information. And here, I mean, in every approach that we studied, there are pros and cons in every approach. This option, if we move forward with it, it would mean that the businesses would have to be responsible for educating patrons and enforcing their own policies, cleaning up litter if they allowed smoking on their patios. And then the city would be enforcing the areas, cleaning the areas on the surrounding sidewalk and paseo areas. It also means, as a drawback, that visitors who are coming to Santa Barbara would not have one rule to follow for all outdoor patios. We wouldn't be able to be consistent throughout the city. We'd probably have to come up with a list, maybe that's maintained on a business organization website or somewhere else, that shows businesses that allow smoking and where it's prohibited. If council chose to designate sidewalks as smoke-free, we could also consider the harbor public walkways in that same restriction, and the same for the outdoor patios that are there at the harbor. But we would want to continue allowing smoking on docks and private vessels, and these are areas that are not open to the general public behind gates. And finally, also street-related are public events. If we were to choose to ban smoking on sidewalks, we could write in language for public events and parades. The farmers market already has a policy for smoking that prohibits smoking on the street during the market. So from there, staff is interested in getting direction from the Ordinance Committee on the recommended areas. And then what we'll do is, once we have a better understanding of all the full scope, we will return to the Ordinance Committee with revised language. And then from there, the Ordinance Committee would forward the ordinance amendments to Council for introduction and adoption. We would probably also, in these meetings, the next meeting, discuss more options related to public education once we have a better idea of the scope of which areas would be considered smoke-free. So I'm going to leave these areas up on the screen for the Ordinance Committee to discuss. And this concludes the presentation. Staff is also available to answer any specific questions on some of the areas we mentioned.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Questions from the committee? Mr. Hotchkiss.
Captain, at public events like 4th of July Parade or Old Spanish Days, do we have much smoking now? I haven't seen much, but I'm wondering if the police have a different impression.
I'm sorry, the question is how many people do we see smoking?
Yeah, do we see a lot of smoking during big public events? Because that's one of the areas that we're requested to look at.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to quantify that. It's not really something we look out for, since there's no ordinance against it at the moment. But just anecdotally from being out there, I see some smoking. I'm not quite sure how to
yeah, no, it's tough.
that.
I agree. I think you're confirming what I see, which is like occasional, but not a lot of smoking. Thank you.
Ms. Muriel, questions?
So in terms of, Ms. Johnson, have you heard from County Public Health? Maybe we'll hear from them today, that they would be willing to help do some outreach, some education. They've been active since we've been taking up this issue. So I think there's organizations that have grants, and they have a strong interest in the subject. Have you had conversations with them?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Murillo, yes, I have talked with Dawn Dunn from the County Public Health Department, and she's been very supportive in looking at our options, and we've talked about funds that might be available to help us give businesses decals and other public education materials. So I think we'll be coordinating for sure on the smoke-free areas that we come up with.
And then in terms of where it said the state law forbids it in public places, so I think there's private areas that feel public, and maybe you did address this, for instance, like the Trader Joe's parking lot, or even the 99-cent store parking lot on Haley Street. That has some space there. That's private property, and they may not have a policy yet. We can't tell them what to do on their private property, I think? Or is that a question for the city attorney? I'm not sure. Thank you.
Mr. Doymus.
Chairman Rouse, Councilmember Murillo. Yes, right now our ordinance is focused, the police power specifically focuses on public places and locations and patios. So our ordinance we haven't looked at in terms of private lots. It's something we could possibly look at. I really don't have an answer in terms of whether the law, our police powers would be able to prohibit smoking in those kind of locations.
That's very good. Thank you. I'm happy to hear what people have to say today.
We
Mr.
have a
Chair.
few of those. Yes, Mr. Hotchkiss.
Quick question. You said decals when Ms. Murillo asked about how could we have decals in the EPV?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Hotchkiss, we would look at our signage laws for sure, and different business windows you've seen that participate in our green business program and other business programs. They have decals that are allowed in certain places, so we would need to come up with something that that meets our laws.
We're pretty strict in the EPV, as you know. Okay.
And Ms. Johnson, quickly, but you've addressed something I asked last time about including open-air dining and bar areas that are located on private and public property, including public right-of-way. So I assume all the sidewalk spaces that we've leased to private businesses for them to do business on. Is that what that includes?
That's correct.
And when you say 42 permitted outdoor dining areas, is that those ones that we lease to? That's what the 42 means?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, we have a fair amount of speaker slips. I'm going to, it's going to be 2 minutes per speaker. I'm going to announce the next speaker, and the one behind that would please come on deck and be ready to go. We've got quite a few to get through in a relatively short period of time. Please no clapping, booing, or other kinds of unsociable noises. All right, very good. We'll start with Justin Hagan, to be followed by Ty Davidson. Mr. Hagan, please. Oh, maybe it's not Mr. Hagan. Sorry. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Hagan. I'm here to represent the American Heart Association. I have a letter to read from the executive director of our local chapter of the American Heart Association, if that's all right. Dear Mayor Schneider and the council members, the American Heart Association and the American Stroke Association supports a smoke-free outdoor ordinance to promote a healthier Santa Barbara. Our board members and volunteers would be interested in the broadest possible protection on outdoor areas. Of special interest are public areas including entryways, dining, recreation areas, public events, sideways, and work sites. We believe that restricting smoking, vaping, and marijuana use in these outdoor locations will protect Santa Barbara residents and visitors from harmful effects of secondhand smoke and electronic cigarette emissions in outdoor areas. It takes only 20 minutes of exposure to secondhand smoke to elevate a non-smoker's heart attack risk to the level of a smoker's heart attack list. Safeguard the Santa Barbara wildlife and ecosystems from discarded cigarette butts, burns, fires, and explosions. Show youth that tobacco use in any form leads to addiction and that its use is not the norm. Limit youth access to tobacco and vaping products. Align with other like and neighboring communities in protecting public health and promote Santa Barbara's values of being a healthy, beautiful, clean destination city. We thank you in advance and urge you to exercise strong leadership in making Santa Barbara a healthier community to live, work, and create in. Sincerely, Lisa Dosh. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ty Davidson, to be followed by Jane Beachwald.
Good afternoon, Council. I feel like I've been to a number of these things, and I just wanted to thank you guys for taking the time out to listen to the public again, and I'll be very brief. I just want to say, again, I am in support of most of the restaurants and bars here in Santa Barbara, and most of these places have done a very good job of maintaining designated areas for smokers. What I'd like to just kind of reiterate is, our concern always, me as a customer especially, we're talking about issues of safety. If you take people from an area where they're in a safe and controlled environment and you just push them out into the darkness where a number of other other things could happen to them. That's a liability and a concern. But then also, we're living in a very scary time where we're seeing our freedoms being ripped away from us, and it just kind of seems like a small minority is making up rules for the majority. And I just want to make sure that we're also being mindful of protecting people's personal freedoms, and smoking is a personal freedom. Of all the things that I've seen and heard here today, I think the third option on the table, that of allowing businesses to kind of come up with their own rules, I think that makes the most sense, and I think that might be the best compromise. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Jane Retchwald, to be followed by Martha Lannon.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is it on?
It's on.
Okay. As the former executive director of the American Lung Association of Santa Barbara County and the co-chair of CEASE, the coalition to engage in a smoke-free effort, I want to thank you and your thoughtful deliberations on improving Santa Barbara City's smoke-free ordinance. Thus far, your recommendations will go a long way toward providing much-needed and wanted public health protections. You may already have heard testimony from me, so today I'll confine my comments to a few points. From what I understand, the primary aim of your policy decisions is to bring the city's grade of the Lung Association state-city report card up from a D to a B or an A. This is exactly what CEASE's members request of you. However, if you exercise the option of not requiring restaurants to have established smoking ordinances, there is no way you can do it better than a C on your grade. You will also be undoing a policy that's been in effect for 22 years, since 1995, and has been effective and non-problematic. Much like other speakers you have heard today, who are supportive of smoke-free policies, I want to encourage you to consider the rights of the 89% of the population who don't smoke, and to continue to move forward and protect the residents and visitors from unwanted toxic effects of secondhand smoke and emission exposure to the maximum extent. Thank you.
May I ask Ms. Brickwald a question?
Please, Ms. Maria.
So the last speaker was advocating for the third option, which was to give the business owner the option of creating their own smoking policies. And what do you think of that?
Well, I think that if it's any, currently now it's 25%, and after 10 o'clock it's 100% allows smoking. If you go back on that and permit smoking, we've gone backwards.
Right.
And that'll have a tremendous impact, so especially on the grading.
So that's what you meant when you said 22 years. So you prefer probably you prefer totally smoke-free.
Yes.
But if we were to compromise, then after 10 p.m. Would be acceptable?
It would if there's consideration about smoke drift to neighboring residential areas.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So Martha Lennon, be followed by Janet Benner.
Good afternoon. My name is Martha Lannon. I've lived in Santa Barbara since the early 1950s, and I'm usually very proud to say I'm from here. If your committee does not recommend the healthiest of options for outdoor smoking regulations affecting both residents and visitors, I'll be embarrassed by the decision, and I think you should be too. I've been a member of CEASE since 1994 when I was a president of a local high school PTA. I'm still engaged in the effort because I believe a smoke-free environment is essential for the health of our population. I appreciate your willingness to improve the city's smoking ordinance, a law in effect since 1995 with an amendment in 2002. When I think of Santa Barbara, I think of pristine beaches, majestic mountains, and historic charm and character, while remaining eco and family-friendly. One prominent local tourism site says the city is known for its quality of life and experience. That is our brand. How can increasing places where people can smoke outdoors equate with quality of life and experience? Is that the brand you want associated with Santa Barbara? Santa Barbara led the way with outdoor dining regulations in the mid-90s. There are regulations calling for 100% smoke-free restaurant and bar patios in places like Ventura, Oxnard, San Luis, and Carpinteria, and the counties of Santa Barbara and Ventura, as well as 70 other communities in the state. Why can't Santa Barbara follow suit? I believe employees should have a smoke-free workplace. No employee should be subjected to exposure to cancer-causing agents as a condition of employment. How can weakening what we now have in place enhance the health of anyone working in such an environment? Option 3 on page 5 of the staff report, not regulating businesses but letting them do it themselves, would reverse current city law on the books since 1995. Why move backward with regard to the health of our population?
You'll need to wrap up, please.
Okay. Breathing clean air should be an inalienable right. Smoking is a habit and a choice. If the city wants to improve its degrade, then they need to improve their regulations and go with as much clean air as possible. Thank you, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Janet Benner will be followed by Pete Degenhart.
So I've been thinking about a week about what I would say this morning. Oh, it's afternoon already. I've lived in Santa Barbara longer than Martha even. I've been here since the 50s. I think I'm the oldest person in the room. And I will tell you that as long as I've lived here, Santa Barbara has been a place of happy, healthy, and full of life. That's who we are. I'm grateful every day that I live here. I've worked the last few years at the farmers market, and there is no smoking at the farmers market. There is no problem about there being no smoking at the farmers market. And I think that people come to this town and they know who we are, and they know that I heard 89% of the people don't smoke here, so we don't smoke in Santa Barbara. And I think the idea of this third option of having the people decide for themselves how they're going to do their little own local ordinances is a little bit far out. I want to say thank you to Dawn, who's worked very hard, and anything that she tells you is the truth. She knows all this stuff, so good for her. I want to thank you people for taking the time and effort to keep Santa Barbara as lovely and as beautiful as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Pete Degenhart to be followed by Aurelio Bocanegra.
Hello. I have the opinion that due to the dependence of our city on foreign tourists who smoke disproportionately more than Americans, the entertainment and hospitality industry will be negatively affected by a smoking ban, especially a ban on private property restaurant and bar patios, which are visited by tourists every day, will lead to a decrease in tax income for the city as well as a loss of jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Aurelio Bocanegra, followed by Bob Hanson.
Council members, good afternoon. It would be safe to say that life is in full session right now across the country, if not globally. The current administration's mantra is keep Americans safe. The other one is make America great. If that's the focus, I'd like to just expand a little bit based on what we're talking about today. If my information is correct, 485,000 Americans die each year because of tobacco at a cost of $170 billion to the healthcare system. There is, to me, no other evil that this society is dealing with or choosing not to deal with. People, from what I've witnessed and experienced, are so desensitized. And also, I'll say that number again, 485,000. Yet, this morning I heard one of the appointees say, we don't want to jeopardize not one American life. So if this room was designated to be 25% of it smoking, would that secondhand smoke stay in its designated area? It's a no-brainer. And I'll end with this. Again, a child's right to breathe is not negotiable. For me, there is no finding a balance in this. If you decide and vote in my opinion, the wrong direction, then you can only categorize yourselves as being surrogates for these big drug dealers who are profiting at the cost of human lives. So, thank you.
Thank you. Bob Hanson, be followed by Bob Stout.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Hanson. I'm the owner of Soho Restaurant and Music Club in downtown Santa Barbara. I am a non-smoker, and I do not like people blowing smoke my direction. But I opposed the proposed ordinance changes, not in public areas like sidewalks and things like that, but in patios that support businesses and keep them in business. There's a lot of empty storefronts along State Street, and if we were to eliminate the possibility of smoking in many of the bars and restaurants that now have it, I think some of them would go by the wayside. I know that we have a non-smoking patio. It's upstairs. 80% of the businesses in Victoria Court are closed, so no smoke ever drifts around. We have had our patio non-smoking for over 22 years, have never had a complaint, simply because if people don't want to go out there, there's another 5,000 square feet inside that they can go in that is smoke-free. You know, I don't know how you enforce the 25% of a patio as being non-smoking, because if you draw a line and say no non-smoking, I can smoke here, and 2 inches over there I can't, and that doesn't, right? I mean, it's going to get to people one way or another. So you've got to have places that are smoke-free, that are basically not going to be impacted by smoke, and our particular establishment is not. Soho basically does a lot of fundraisers, community stuff. We're a place for up-and-coming musicians, such as Jack Johnson, where he appeared. His first gig was at our place to start their careers and go through. So we have a major impact on the music industry in our own small way. And if you value Soho, we would probably lose about $150,000 a year if we were to stop it. We survive on a small margin, so we basically do it because we provide a service to the community and because my wife is a music freak.
May I ask a question?
Ms. Muriel?
Reed, so you allow smoking on your patio or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But if we were to stop that, we have a lot of bands that attract a crowd that likes to drink, listen to music, and smoke. And when we have had patio remodels where we couldn't use that patio, we had people calling us all the time saying, I smoke, is your patio open yet? And we say no, because they say, okay, well, let us know when it is. And so we've suffered significant downturns in business when that patio is not available.
And do you find that more people smoke after 10 p.m.?
People smoke based on when we have the event.
Okay.
If we have an event that starts at 5, then that's when they start smoking. Some events are more, have a higher percentage than others. But I'll go ahead.
And do customers come to you and complain that people are smoking on the patio?
I have
non-smokers complain?
Never gotten a complaint in 22 years, 7 nights a week.
Okay.
And I'll wrap this up. If City Council here values Soho as a city and community treasure, please, at minimum, do not exempt smoking on bars with patios, or at least Soho.
Okay, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Hotchkiss has a question.
So, just to clarify, the system seems to work as far as you're concerned.
It's never been an issue. It doesn't stop anybody from coming in. It allows more people to come in.
And smokers go one side and non-smokers stay in
its patio's got 2 doors, that separate the stage room and the restaurant from the patio. So there's no inclination for the smoke to go in. We do satisfy the law and the ordinance in regards to keeping people away from the front, not allowing smoking near the front door and the sidewalks around us. But on that patio, that should be my call.
And folks cooperate?
We never have anybody smoking inside. I had one reggae guy that was about 90 years old that I came back from the bank one day that was doing sound check, and he was sitting playing his drums with a marijuana stick about that big coming out of his mouth inside. So that's the only time it's ever happened, and he was quickly admonished of that fact.
I don't imagine he was complaining.
Not too much, because he made a lot of money that day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bob Stout, to be followed by Sharon Bufano.
Mr. Chair, council members of Hotchkiss and Murillo, thank you. I appreciate what everybody's saying today. I think this is obviously a charged and very, very important issue. I recognize the health benefits of staying away from smoke. I'm not a smoker. I own a restaurant and I own a bar, have been downtown for quite a while. And like Councilman Rouse, I think we were restaurateurs when 1995 when smoking inside was banned. So we've seen the progression. I would just simply say it's a tough decision. I appreciate everything everybody, staff has put into this situation. In looking at the harbor and the golf course and the bar patios, it seems like there's room for exceptions. I think it's wise to look carefully at those. And I'd just like to urge you to not come down too heavy. I know as a bar owner, not the restaurant owner side, even if smoking is allowed on my patio, I'll probably move forward just because as I see times changing, I'll probably move forward to trying to, whether I have to or not, provide some areas for non-smokers, whether that's, I agree with Mr. Hansen, the cutoff's tough, but I mean, the idea is that people, they don't want to smoke, maybe I can provide an area that they know there won't be smoke. I don't think it's that hard, and I think most people will end up doing that. But I think to come down too hard would be a little bit draconian, certainly terrible for business, but hate to mention business when you're talking health because I understand both perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Bufano will be followed by Jacqueline Nunez.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Rouse and members of the Ordinance Committee. My name is Sharon Bufano, and I have been the chairperson or the co-chairperson of CEASE since 1963. I have a large family, and I am an oncology nurse specialist by education. I have a long record of volunteerism with the American Cancer Society. I'm here today to commend you on your efforts to bring Santa Barbara City up to date with the related tobacco laws, hopefully matching Santa Barbara County. Their ordinances, making your ordinances equal and having, therefore, a level playing field. We know that this works because of what happened with the smoke-free bar situation. Back when that ordinance passed, we made it uniform, that the county and the city had the same laws so that people were not confused about where to go and what to do. The citizens of Santa Barbara want smoke-free air for themselves and for their families. You know, this is interesting. Mostly, even smokers don't like to breathe other smokers' smoke. Businesses, including restaurants, are owned and run by Santa Barbara people who want to breathe clean air. Breathing clean air should not be a choice. It should be an expectation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacqueline Nunez, followed by Dawn Dunn.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Rouse and members of the Ordinance Committee. My name is Jacqueline Nunez, and I'm the advisor for a local youth tobacco prevention coalition called the Coalition of Youth Advocates, also known as COYA in the community. We're a teen alliance involved in raising awareness about the health risks of tobacco and products like these that are influencing our youth today. So 2 for 99-cent cigarillos, strawberry lemonade, e-cig juice, and colorful pens, hookah pens that could be mistaken for pencils in pencil boxes. I'm speaking on behalf of our members today who have important stories to tell but are currently in school. The following comments are from our members. They're transcribed from our meeting last week. Growing up in Santa Barbara, we have been exposed to secondhand smoke and witnessed its negative impacts on our community. From secondhand smoke in the streets, restaurants, and beaches, this issue has carried into our lives as teenagers. Now, we watch our classmates smoking in school parking lots and hallways, but without your help, we don't have the full capability to help them and ourselves. The tobacco industry targets youth. Yolo County just outlawed flavored tobacco products due to its intentional placement near schools and candy flavors that attract children. As the Coalition of Youth Advocates, we'd like to thank you for your help thus far, and we urge you to protect us, our families, and our peers to your furthest capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nunez. I have one quick question. Where are those distributed? Are those in any retail outlet that sells tobacco?
Yes, so the hookah pens you can buy at any store, any gas station, and these electronic cigarettes and e-cig juice can be purchased at any tobacco store, or these cigarillos you can purchase at any gas station or any store, grocery store.
Okay, thank you. And a quick question for Mr. Kalon. If we were to restrict tobacco smoking, would these kind of materials be included in that restriction? I'm not really familiar with their composition or how they work.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yeah, the definition that we would use would update it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nunez. Quick question, Mr. Hotchkiss, please.
But did you say that you would restrict sales of these?
No, I wasn't referring to sales.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Don Dunn, to be followed by Primo Castro.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chairperson Russ and members of the Ordinance Committee. My name is Dawn Dunn, and I coordinate the Tobacco Prevention Settlement Program at the Santa Barbara County Public Health Department. And the only reason that I came up is I wanted to make sure that in your deliberations with regard to the definition, it'll probably be in tobacco product as opposed to in smoke, that you make some consideration to adding some language that allows the use of FDA-approved nicotine replacement therapies, which would be like the patches, the gum, the lozenges. They also have inhalers and nasal spray, which are used for the purposes of quitting tobacco use. Because at some point, there could be an electronic smoking device. Right now, there is not. It would be at least 3 years out, and I don't know that any are in the pipeline, that could be approved to help people quit. So we do a lot of things, and one of them is we attempt to promote quitting tobacco use and using the FDA-approved modalities. They contain nicotine. So as long as your definitions make sure that these products can be used where other tobacco products cannot, that's generally what's there's a language for that, and I can work with the city attorney to do that. Also, a question was asked of Ms. Johnson whether our department would be supportive of assisting with public education, signage, et cetera. Number one, any signage that would be, or decals, I just happen to have one teeny tiny one, these were used for restaurant patios, like tables, or could be a trash can. Generally speaking, we have assisted every city with financial aid that's commensurate with both our budget and the need, both with the development of signage. But it is entirely up to the city, the way that signage is made, the vendor you use, et cetera. So that is Prop 56 passed, and in April there will be an additional $2 tax. We do not yet know the exact amount that will roll into my budget, but it's significant, and we have every intention of working with cities that are going forward and progressing in achieving the public health goals that are around tobacco use. So you would be a top priority. You're a large city in our community.
Thank you. Ms. Marie, you have a question?
Yeah, please. Ms. Dunn, so in regard to Ms. Bufano's comment of uniformity, right, county, city, so the county did include e-cigarettes and vaping to be considered. Well, it's state law now, so we.
Yes,
right,
but
okay.
State law only regulates a few outdoor areas. So what the county did, and several of our neighboring cities, was they included vaping, marijuana, and really, if it looks like smoke, it's smoke. So it's a broad definition, much like what is being proposed by your city attorney and staff.
And I'm looking at the chart, trying to figure out what the county unincorporated unincorporated areas do about restaurant and bar patios?
Okay, so
What do you know about
100%
that?
in June of May, effective June or July of 2015, the county did increase its 75-25 regulations, which had been uniform across South County since January 1, 1995, to go 100% smoke-free in outdoor dining. At the time, they exempted bars. They said basically that an outdoor bar patio could allow smoking 100% of the time. We don't have a bar anymore. The one bar in the county. So it was easy to do. Carpinteria did the same thing. They don't have any bars. We had Creekside, and Creekside is now closed. So right now in the unincorporated area, there actually is not a freestanding bar that was affected by that. But in fact, Oxnard and Ventura and the county of Ventura just went 100% smoke-free with outdoor dining, including bars. How that's working, we'd have to talk to their staff. So that's the answer to that.
So 100% smoke-free before 10 p.m.? Or
There's
just
no hour designation whatsoever, nor do we go out and patrol. Problems are self-policing, as Ms. Johnson stated. And the one other thing that I would state is that we worked pretty closely with communities, and the bar patio concept is you count your tables and divide and round up using rounding principles. It's not a square footage issue, and yes, there's drift, but it was to protect the majority. In other words, at the time, 75-25 was a pretty reasonable composition of the state's tobacco prevalence. Tobacco use prevalence, excuse me. Thank you. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Primo Castro to be followed by Maggie Campbell.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Primo Castro with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, in strong support of a 100% smoke-free outdoor ordinance. We've seen the studies. We know what secondhand smoke causes. We understand what secondhand does to your body. At the end of the day, we're trying to protect families that come to Santa Barbara, the city of Santa Barbara, that do patronize all the establishments. We want to make sure that we're also very considerate of the people that actually work there in these establishments. You have to remember one thing: as secondhand smoke drifts and it gets into the ventilation systems, restaurants, and this is not just restaurants, this is everybody. Every business runs the same way. Nobody has separate ventilation systems, right? So once it gets into the system, it's going to get dispersed everywhere throughout the establishment. So there's no such thing as separate ventilation systems. It's just not feasible, right? We've never heard of it, and I'm sure no business will go ahead and put separate ventilation systems for any air drift. So that's why we're very opposed to any percentage after certain hour designations. We're here to protect lives. Obviously, Santa Barbara County passed by an overwhelming majority Prop 56 in 2016. So we're very excited about that. Please, let's continue on moving this forward. There's a lot that we could do, and we're just here to protect lives, especially our loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie Campbell to be followed by Richard Pick. Ms. Campbell.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the Ordinance Committee. Thank you. I'm Maggie Campbell, the Executive Director for Downtown Santa Barbara. We wake up every day because we have responsibility for taking care of the public right-of-way in downtown through the Plaza contract, and thank you for your support on that. We started some policy research more than a year ago with a consultant we had at the time, Zara Nahar Moore, who was charged with helping us understand what was happening in policy around this issue, mostly because of the impacts of the litter and the impacts of the smoking assembly that was happening on a regular basis on State Street. We, for instance, know post-Fiesta, I really don't know what is harder to pick up, all the confetti or all the cigarette butts, but it's very much a very real and measurable impact on the street. We are excited that you are taking this issue up. We represent a diverse constituency of members. Many of the bar and restaurant owners that are in the room who may be on different sides of this are certainly among our membership ranks. And so we want to monitor this conversation carefully. The quality of the experience for everyone is what's most important, as I know that you understand. The proposal about the 20-foot distance on the sidewalks, I would have a lot of questions about that. I know we have a lot of recessed doorways, and we have a lot of benches today that are not 20 feet from the businesses they're impacting because we get regular complaints. And so I would not want to see an unintended consequence of a linear strip of a couple feet that people could stand on all the time and smoke. So I think that's a little problematic. I've been in a couple different communities where this kind of legislation has been implemented. That level playing field is very important, and we appreciate you taking this issue up. We expect we'll ask our board to take a position on it depending on what is proposed.
Mr. Hotchkiss has a question.
What's your resolution or suggestion for the 20-foot remark you made?
I don't necessarily have a solution to propose. I guess I would ask if that's going to be seriously considered, that you actually conduct some measuring and test to see that we're not creating an unintended consequence. It's going to be a bigger problem of creating problem areas where smokers are going to concentrate.
So what do you mean by unintended consequence here?
Well, for instance, let's say there's a bench in front of
Whatever.
XYZ business,
Yeah.
and you go out and measure it, and they're 23 feet. That bench is bolted in the sidewalk, and they're 23 feet from their door. 10 people can sit there and smoke on that bench all day long, and there isn't anything they can do to enforce it.
Right.
So while it works for one business because of where their door is, maybe it's a property line, but even still, if our sidewalks in some spaces are less than 20 feet or wider than 20 feet, if they're wider than 20 feet, that really doesn't address the situation of trying to address the environment for everyone's interests.
All right. Well, okay.
Thank you.
Richard Pinnock to be followed by Don Goldberg to be the final speaker.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. I'm here on behalf of the 24 employees that work at Sammy's Kennel on State Street. We're in the unfortunate position where we have a bench either side of our doorway where people use these benches 80% of the time for smoking. So we are constantly subject to secondhand cigarette smoke. All day long, I hear complaints from my employees. They even come up to me and say, Richard, who's liable for this? If I come down with lung cancer, who am I going to sue? The employer, the state? Who do I go after? It's ridiculous what my employees have to be subjected to. 3 of them do not smoke. My customers leave the store on a regular basis because of this. They complain to me. There's nothing I can do. The benches are within 20 feet of a bus stop, which is not legal to smoke. Within that far close to a bus stop, I've asked for no smoking signs to be put on the benches. Never seen that happen. We have people smoking marijuana on a regular basis on these benches. Last time I called dispatch, I was told it's now legal to smoke marijuana. I said, no, you're incorrect. I said, you cannot smoke marijuana in a public place. This call should be recorded. I was put on hold. They got back to me. They said, yes, you're correct, Mr. Pinnock. We'll send somebody down. But unfortunately, the police are under a huge amount of stress, and by the time they get down there, the offenders have left. Meanwhile, I've got customers in my store with young children. They get upset, and they leave, which costs sales. These sales probably go out of state, online, so as a city, you see none of the tax revenue. So I'm really here. I'm not against people like Bob's Bar, where people have the choice to go in, but my employees do not have the choice. My customers do not have the choice, and we're being subjected to something like this. The only other one thing I would say is you're not allowed to drink and drive going up and down State Street. More people die on a daily basis from secondhand smoke than drinking and driving. So if drinking and driving is illegal to do it in public, why shouldn't secondhand smoke be?
Mr. Hodges has a question.
Every time I've been by Sammy's, the door is closed. The front door is closed.
We've been closing it because of the secondhand smoke recently.
Okay, so that keeps it out?
90% of the time it's open. I've got photographs here for you that are
Yeah, I know, but I'm just telling you, when I go by, first off, there's no bench there.
We've been closing it.
There's no bench there now.
There's no bench because of the smoke. You'll see the employees.
Whatever the
come
reason,
close.
there's no bench there now. Do people still smoke in front of your place?
Not as much. You've
Okay.
probably seen it closed in the last month or so because of the weather, because it's very cold.
Okay.
But in the summertime, it's open all the time. As a retailer, you should always have your front doors open, welcoming customers in. I do have employees that walk up there and ask me on a regular basis, Richard, the smoke, what we have is the building next to us is empty, so we have people standing in the corners there smoking. There's no restaurant there. So they lean up against the wall, smoke there, it drifts right into the store. And we have that on a continuous basis. I brought some photographs if you'd like to see. This was taken on one day, dealing with the benches. You can see, any of the...
You can hand it to the clerk if you'd like.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the final speaker is Don Goldberg.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Rouse and members of the Ordinance Committee, Ms. Murillo, Mr. Hotchkiss. I've been a member of CEAS for over 15 years. I'd like to speak today about the bar and restaurant patios, the smoking ban on the patios. And before I get into what I had planned here, I just want to let you know that 1,000 people in Santa Barbara, not 100 or 500, but 1,000 people were surveyed regarding the smoking laws. 85% of them were in favor of smoke-free bars and restaurant patios. Smoking infringes on others' rights. The act of smoking is inherently intrusive to non-smokers in the nearby area. We all know about the well-documented negative health effects of secondhand smoke. People who choose not to smoke should not have to be exposed to accommodate those who do. Having smoking and non-smoking areas is simply not sufficient. Smoke does not magically stay in the smoking area. It migrates anywhere it wants to migrate. The gentleman who spoke from Soho, with all due respect, I take exception. I've been there many, many times. My musician friends, business friends. I've hosted events, parties there for my own company. I can tell you that the smoke definitely drifts in at Soho from the patio. It's a problem. People have complained. The gentleman who spoke today, if he didn't receive a complaint, I won't challenge him on that. But I know firsthand, and I can bring many people here who would agree with what I just stated. The choice is taken away in public places that allow smoking. The reality is when smoking is allowed, non-smoking individuals' choices are taken away from them. Smoke does not just linger around the person that is smoking. It migrates everywhere, as I've stated.
You need to wrap up, please.
I hope I can have another half
2
a
minutes.
minute.
You're about 2:30 right now.
So I had a meeting with Dr. Jeff Kupperman this morning. I'll be very brief, with Santa Barbara Pulmonary. When his comment is, when we're younger, it's all too easy to not really truly appreciate the value of good health. When we get a little older, we appreciate the most important thing in life is our health. Dr. Kupperman asks, and I ask, before you vote, please take a deep breath, close your eyes, think about your health, your family's health, and the family that we call Santa Barbara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's back to the committee. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to remind our committee members and the public that our Santa Barbara Youth Council weighed in on the matter and recommended that we restrict smoking in public areas, and specifically they said it's gross when you inhale smoke in public areas. So, and I am persuaded, because I believe in science, that secondhand smoke is harmful to good health. And the cigarette butts are pollution. Especially in, I know people who extinguish them and put them in the trash can and Plenty of people don't, though. They flick them, and on the beach, we already talked about the beach, stick it right in the sand. That's so wrong. And I stand by the vote that we took before about beaches and parks. I wanted to speak for Maria Perez, who didn't make it today. She owns Centro Musical on Milpa Street. I was there yesterday at a small business gathering, and she was going to come because the bar next door, people smoke, and she cleans up the cigarette butts, and the smoke drifts into her store, which has items for children, and so she's concerned about the secondhand smoke and the cigarette butts. And she said people smoke at the bus stop. So is the fellow still here who is talking about the bus stops? I'm the city council liaison to the MTD bus agency, and I will bring up the topic of how in the world they would enforce that. I think smoking goes on in bus stops all over the city. If they don't have proper signage, maybe the bus driver doesn't want to say something if they see someone putting out a cigarette at the bus stop, but it's at least worth the question, the public discussion of the bus stops are supposed to be smoke-free, and I think they're not. And enforcement in general will be a concern, and when we talk at the city council level, that would be a great thing to pursue. You mentioned who can write citations, and I know that we're also depending on residents telling other residents, hey, that's against the rules. And I know some people feel strongly about that, and they will tell somebody, you're not supposed to be smoking there. So I know we're concerned about the State Street corridor. It's our plaza. It's our village center. And Sammy's, I understand, what you're saying. And then I talked to Maria yesterday about Milpa Street. So the streets where there's a lot of people and commerce, I'm persuaded that we should ban smoking there. The golf course, I get that point. There's outposts to be created there. And that was a good argument put forward by staff. I'm following staff's recommendation on that. The harbor.
I was going to suggest, Ms. Maria, if I may interrupt, that we would, because we're tasked with giving direction back to the discussion for council potentially.
I was just going to start focusing on the point. Did you want to go to the points?
Well, I thought maybe we could go in that order, and maybe we could deliberate as a committee that way. That makes sense to you. So the harbor, as I understand it, I've spoken to Mr. Reeve, the waterfront director, that we've got a lot of public areas in the harbor, but we have also a marina that's behind keyed gates, which is essentially it's public property, but there are private boats and slips and that type of thing. So I think the proposal may be, number one, we need to prohibit smoking on Stearns Wharf because there are real and very frequent fire hazards on the wharf. So I think
we did vote on that one last time.
I think we did, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the thing about the harbor general area itself would be to restrict, I think the proposals that might stand would be to restrict smoking in the public areas, paseos and sidewalks, but leave that on the outside of the keyed gates where you go into private property, boats, that type of thing. So I don't know if that's a direction the committee would like to take. Or let me ask Ms. Johnson, do you want a specific up or down on each of these line items, or how would you like to see this formatted?
I think that would be helpful. Maybe the harbor, the sidewalks, a few of these are combined. So I think that when you address a few of them, they will automatically go into the next one.
Well, since we're talking about public sidewalks, beaches, parks, that type of thing, there's the public areas around the harbor.
Correct.
There are keyed gates, which are basically kind of a membership situation. So I guess you consider that more of a private area. So to be consistent with the city, the
I'm
committee
supportive
agrees.
Of that, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hotchkiss, you have a comment on that?
Specifically,
on the harbor,
the
behind the gates
Yeah.
remains unrestricted, but
Yeah.
outside of the gates, okay. So that would be. This isn't a format. This is direction we're giving to council. So, then going to the golf course. I know we have Ms. Zachary here, the director. She is here. Yes, she is here. Okay. The proposal. as we understand it, was that the restricted smoking.
At the driving range, it would be restricted near the restaurant and the patio there, and then one more area, the practice area.
And then if I can bring Ms. Zachary up just for a moment, because the recommendation from Parks and Rec is to allow smoking on the golf course, so we'd like to have you
but in limited areas.
Speak to that, please. Ms. Zachary.
Chair Rouse, committee members, currently we don't allow smoking around the clubhouse, which includes the pro shop, Mulligan's. There's a putting green outside and a practice area, and then the driving range. So if it's your recommendation and council action, that would become part of the smoking ordinance. We're recommending that it not include the actual playable portion of the golf course. Generally speaking, there's no more than 4 players that are playing at one time together. They're distance apart from each other. Smoke disperses. We don't have an issue with litter there, so there's also less of an indication that multiple people would be affected by secondhand smoke. Those groups choose to be with smokers or not be with smokers because they're playing together as a group. We did a lot of research on what communities have done in California, and by and large, other public golf courses, they have exempted a no smoking rule for the actual playable area of the golf course.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. Are there courses that we compete with, which would be like Glen Annie or Sandpiper? Those, do you know what the policies are? Do they have policies along those lines?
Mr. Chair and committee members, none of them currently prohibit smoking.
Okay.
So it could have an effect on our marketability.
All righty.
So, Mr. Chair, I would move the staff recommendation on the golf course.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Favor? From second, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. I mean, that's the direction we're giving there. Okay, let's go back to your list, if we may, Ms. Johnson.
I suggest to some degree that the philosophy we just discussed for the golf course also sort of works for the beaches, because they're wide open areas, except on public events, which is a different matter. But by and large, people are sort of isolated there, and if somebody wants to smoke, I don't see it affecting other people very much. So rather than just have a blanket ban there, I would apply the same philosophy to our beach as I do at the golf course for your consideration.
My comment to that would be that I would like to see what our neighboring communities do with that, like the golf courses. That was one reason why I was asking golf courses we compete with. So in Carpinteria, Goleta, and the county and whatnot, what's the rule and restriction? I would, because of the numerous beach cleanups I've been on, I do happen to see cigarette butts as one of the more prevalent items of trash.
I agree there are cigarette butts, but to me that's not a deal killer, if I can put it that way.
Ms. Murillo.
Mr. Chair, we voted on it last time, if I'm correct, and so I guess we're going to have a procedural question. We already voted on it, and we decided to make that recommendation to the City Council that we would ban smoking on beaches, and I would stand by that vote. I get your point, Mr. Hotchkiss, but we're one of the few coastal cities in California that allows smoking on the beaches, and it's a natural resource.
Well, I agree.
Sensitive habitat.
Yeah, I agree that one of the few. I sort of think that distinguishes us. We're trying to be different here, and I try to be less restrictive rather than more, if it's at all possible. It seems to me we don't have great offense in allowing at the beaches. So I don't know. I think I voted against that last time, and I certainly would this time.
That could be. I do agree with Ms. Murillo, so I think the pleasure of the committee is going to be to recommend to council to maintain that. Is that...
And Mr. Hotchkiss, you can make your arguments when all 7 of us are up here, and
yes.
You might outvote the 2 of us.
Doubtful, but I'll give it a try.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Okay, it's sidewalks and paseos. I think the question was last time that I had was about what we rented to private operators, and I think you've addressed that in your presentation. And I believe last time we talked about having the sidewalks, public sidewalks, at least the public sidewalks, if not the paseos, as smoke-free. Am I remembering that correct, Ms. Johnson, as far as what we recommended?
In terms of our presentation so far, we've combined sidewalks and paseos, but we could also split them apart.
Okay, very good. Ms. Murillo.
I wanted to ask about restricting or banning smoking on sidewalks in the commercial zones. I thought that was the discussion that we had last time. Mr. Kalan, could we do that? And that in the commercial areas, and then the residential areas would be, again, that's a nod to, more private areas. I think it's a way of.
Sure.
So we could do that.
Yeah, you can draw the line where you want to draw it. John, anything else?
Thank you.
The Health and Safety Code permits us to exactly do that. The state law basically says we cannot be less restrictive than state law. So there are a number of locations in state laws where it's already prohibited, but we can be more restrictive. So that being said, if we want to ban it in certain sidewalks in the city, but not certain other sidewalks, we have that option.
So we could say the commercial areas based on the belief that that's where people congregate and there's more exposure to the secondhand smoke?
That could be your policy decision. You can, and the ordinance create certain locations where it's prohibited. Yes.
Okay, and that's sidewalks. And the paseos are those pathways in between. They're considered public property. I would have to ban smoking there too.
I think number one, we want to make something. If we're going to have something that's enforceable, it better be pretty easy to understand by all parties. And the more we try to parse this, the more we try to complicate it, it's going to be less and less easy to do. Plus, we are in the middle of trying to urbanize, or I should say, residentialize the downtown. I mean, that's been the big push. So the mixed use and the housing and the commercial. So I would probably struggle with that as far as trying to parse which, giving the zoning map to the police officers, I think is going to be a little bit of a complication. So I think we've got to go one way or the other. I would favor, if we're going to talk about public areas, we've got to talk about public areas, period. And so if you're in a residential neighborhood and you're in your backyard, you do whatever you want. If you're out there on the sidewalks with kids and skateboards and whatnot, then it'll be part of the public area restriction, at least in my view. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Well, is it a problem right now? I mean, what we've got, do we have a big problem right now?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Hotchkiss, I can speak to the letters that we've received, the comments that we've received.
Yeah, I get a bunch too. So, I mean, it's like rockets from both sides, so they kind of cancel each other out. But do we have a... Go ahead,
I was
please.
just going to say, we've received 164 comments, and 26 of those were saying that they did not want us to enact any type of ban, and the other 138, that's 84%, wanted us to enact a smoke-free.
I'm actually surprised that it should have been more like 90% because only 10% of the people smoke here. But doesn't mean we shouldn't respect the minority. Correct?
Ms. Muriel?
Sorry.
Well, to move it forward, I would move, Mr. Chair, that the Ordinance Committee recommend to the City Council banning smoking on public sidewalks and paseos in the commercial zones. Is that what you and I had found some agreement on, Mr. Chair?
Well, I was trying not to, because of the mixed zone and things we're doing. We have now the C2, the OC, we have R4. We have a lot of areas where you combine commercial and residential activity. So, and once again, I'm looking at ease of enforcement and ease of understandability by all parties. Part of me agrees with Mr. Hotchkiss is how big is the problem really. But if we're going to do something, I think we need to make it simple. In my mind, we have to make it to publicly accessible areas and properties. We need to try to leave the private areas as alone as we can. That's a simplistic overview as we try to get down to these various details and areas. But whatever we do has to be understandable by all parties. So it doesn't. Some of these other communities have this. If somebody's actively walking by, well, define that for me. I don't know what that means. So let's keep it simple, in my mind. Let's stay with public areas. Let's stay where people have to go and visit, like the guy that says at Sammy's Camera. I mean, his customers aren't there because they choose to go to a smoking camera shop. they're there to buy cameras, and they're being affected by smoke, so he wants some relief. I get that.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest, and Mr. Kalan can tell me, or Mr. Doimus, if this is not doable, the Central Business District, ban smoking there. The Milpas Street corridor, both sides of the street, and all of State Street. That would include Upper State. And the Central Business District would include the side streets and the downtown where people gather, where there's a lot of people gathered. Does anybody else like that suggestion? Or is that doable, Mr. Doimus?
The ordinance can carve out locations in the city where it's prohibited and not prohibited.
Maybe what we could do, Mr. Chair, is have punt this to the city council hearing where the staff would come back with options of that, for instance, and some zones mapped out.
We're making recommendations, so we're really punting everything to the entire council. But once again, I see that as complex and a little bit arcane. So I don't support that particular idea. And then when you say the downtown commercial area, do you mean, what are you doing with the restaurants and bars in that case? You're talking about public areas. You're talking about private areas. I mean, there's a lot of those things that need
No,
to
we're
be
just
addressed.
talking about the public sidewalks and paseos
Okay.
right
All right.
now. You wouldn't have a map, Ms. Johnson, on the Central Business District with you?
I don't have a map. And for our next meeting, we could have a few different options showing different areas mapped out, if that would help the ordinance committee.
Okay.
But I really would recommend the Milpas area, too. That's a huge public corridor on our east side.
Mr. Hotchkiss, you have a comment?
There's a whole important population that we're just ignoring here. These people are obviously concerned and sincere, but there's every time a cruise ship comes in or people come here from another country, they have a different attitude about this. They look at us as somewhat provincial. Worldwide, people smoke. In lesser industrialized countries, they smoke more than anybody else. 1 out of 2 tourists from China is probably a smoker. We spend a lot of money and benefit greatly from their visits here that allows us to finance much of the problems and projects in our city. So I don't want to be telling them, God, come to Santa Barbara. Oh, by the way, put that cigarette out. Here's your citation. Welcome. I don't want to say that. I want them to feel that they can enjoy themselves here with our own population. So to do any of these blanket bans, to me, is a great mistake. I would urge all of us to be a little more, if I can put it this way, liberal in thinking this way, so that we can really...
Say that, Frank?
I said that. So that we really can sustain both the happiness of our residents and our tourist population. So whatever we decide, I hope all of us will keep that in mind. It's easier for me to say that because I'm sort of a marketing guy, but I ask you to keep that in mind too.
Ms. Mario?
Mr. Chair, I would respectfully remind Mr. Hotchkiss that Kathy Janega Dykes with the Visit Santa Barbara, the Film Commission, she gave us information that she checked with other travel bureaus, and they reported to her that there has been no loss of tourism dollars related to a ban on smoking.
Let me suggest that is the bigger picture thing, and we still have a couple of bullet points to go through to recommend to council. I think that's a debate we will have at the full council, because that sounds like you're not in favor of doing these regulations, which is fine. Let's interways of public buildings. Once again, I think that would be combined in with the public paseos and sidewalks. I don't know what public building does not accessed by a public sidewalk or paseo, so I think that's almost a moot point if we continue with that. Clearly, people are interested in what we're going to come up with outdoor areas for restaurants and outdoor patios for bars. Let's see if we can come up with some direction to give council that we've talked about today. Ms. Murillo.
So right now, Ms. Johnson, bars are exempt. Somebody can go to a bar and smoke on their patio, front patio, back patio, anytime.
That's correct.
Okay. I wonder how the restaurant or the bar owners would feel if we made it what we do with the restaurants, and that is 25% during the day and then 100%. Okay, I'm getting mixed up again. So the same the same rules that we have for restaurant patios, where it would limit. Right. Okay.
I've added to the screen the current rule for the restaurant patios. So currently the patios are smoke-free before 10 p.m. and then smoking is allowed on 25% of the space after 10 p.m. for restaurants.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now that I look at that, and I'm sorry if I'm getting a little confused about the percentages. I'm willing to do very strict smoking bans everywhere except for bars. That's a personal freedom. People should have a place to drink and smoke if they want to, but I'm willing to. I see Ms. Henderson in the back. All the other ones, the festivals, no smoking, public sidewalks, no smoking, beaches, no smoking. I just want to make space at the bars for people to be able to do those activities as a nod to personal freedoms and what they consider vices. So thank you.
Do you have a comment, Mr. Hotchkiss?
Well, that's half a loaf, but I think that we kind of ought to stick with what we got now because it works.
Okay. And my personal take would be that, once again, let's talk about the public areas. Let's talk about where the common areas are and people go regardless of purpose, and not specifically to go to a bar or a club. So I would just as soon not have us go in and try to over-regulate private areas. So I personally would like to stick to a very simplistic outdoor inclusion. Can we go back to the bullet points? Let me go back. Did we give you clear direction for council on that as far as what you understand? No.
So on the for the outdoor patio areas for restaurants, I was hearing Councilmember Murillo interested in having those patio areas considered smoke-free at all times for the restaurants, and the bars exempt for any smoking restrictions. And then Councilmember Rouse, I was hearing that the bars and restaurants would create their own policy.
Yeah,
that's what I've heard.
And I remember this. We had this discussion 25 years ago in these very chambers. I remember basically the industry actually being a step ahead of where even a lot of the other organizations were going, because I don't even know where you eat and smoke at the same time anymore. I certainly don't frequent them, and I wouldn't plan to frequent them because I don't want to be around that. And I think that the places that are trying to compete with each other are doing so. And as Mr. Stout pointed out, I think the market is going that direction. Well, he still has some customers and clients that apparently like to smoke, but I think that's beginning to diminish on its own. So, but he's a bar and a club, and that's. And then I think we would make a mistake by wanting to go inside of these areas or into these private realms and try to create a new set of rules for people that may not even want to be there.
I agree.
How about I make a motion that we exempt bars, but for restaurants, they can only allow smoking after 10 p.m.
Which is what they do now?
I'd second that.
Okay, we're good with that. All in favor? Aye. Which is basically not a change for the restaurants. I mean, I would like to be consistent with what the county's doing as much as we can, but I think that point was well taken.
Are there other things we need to decide here, sir?
There's one more bullet point, Ms. Johnson, if you would.
So just quickly, so that would mean smoking allowed on 100% of the patio after 10 p.m.
Whatever
just based
it is
on
today.
Okay.
Was that your motion,
after
Ms.
10
Mario?
p.m. But not,
Yes.
and smoke-free before 10 p.m.
For a restaurant.
For a restaurant, okay.
For all those restaurants that are open after 10 p.m.
What's your other one?
There's one more bullet point, I believe, Ms. Johnson. As I recall, public events and parades.
I move that we ban smoking at public events and parades, Mr. Chair.
We're not getting much now. Why bother?
Oh, I have to agree with Ms. Murillo. I think that to be consistent with our public sidewalks and paseos and streets, that it only makes sense to do this at these events. Now, I assume that a public event is considered to be an outdoor event in this definition?
Assumed, yes. And I would also say that public events and parades, you could consider that lumped into whatever we decide to do with sidewalks and paseos.
Yeah. I mean, to
Because
me,
there
it's
should-
only consistent with what we're doing on the public streets and sidewalks anyway, which is another reason why I really don't want to parse about zones and whatnot as we park in neighborhoods and walk down to Shoreline Park, or we do these different things. We should be consistent about it. We should make it very easy to enforce and not try to delineate areas and zones. So I would say that the events and parades only makes consistent sense with the outdoor sidewalks and paseos. Mr. Hodges.
Well, let's just say that 2 out of 3 people here recommend that.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
That's a very fair recommendation.
And you can give a minority report when we make the recommendation.
Yes, you may.
So, Ms. Johnson, sorry, did we vote on work sites? Because I thought that was one of the issues that was still hanging out there, but it's not on your list.
It was not on the list, but we previously had it along with also some areas, housing, common areas and housing. No one had discussed it previously, but it's something we could also add to our discussion if we wanted to. Or for the next ordinance committee meeting, we could talk about our outdoor work sites.
So, and what's the definition of an outdoor work site? Like a construction site?
Correct. A construction site would be probably the best example. Dunn might be able to help a little bit more there. An outdoor place of employment that is not an outdoor bar or restaurant patio.
Can we ask Ms. Dunn to describe what she thinks an outdoor work site is?
Yes, I believe that is the primary outdoor work site is a construction site. And I think that the idea is that, again, it's exposure for employees who have no voice. So I don't think necessarily you wouldn't say that no smoking could take place, but that it should be, respectful of all the employees within that area. It could potentially be like a food cart or truck or something that was portable, that was a work site, but I really think it's designed for construction sites, and I can get you more examples from language of other laws.
I don't get complaints about that, and that seems to be in the area of private issues. I'm not.
Yeah,
Mr. Hotchkiss left. Maybe we shouldn't be talking anymore about it.
No. I don't think don't need to take an action on this, but I do think for a point of discussion that it is, once again, it could unnecessarily complicate where we're trying to go today. And I think the more bells and whistles we put on this ordinance, the less enforceable and the less effective it may end up being. And that's kind of my point.
Very good, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify our direction on sidewalks and paseos. Should we return with some maps of some of these different areas?
That was Ms. Murillo's request, so.
Okay.
I think so.
That's what we can do.
Okay.
And so what you mentioned was, mixed zoning would be, you said C and M and manufacturing, and
and as we try to,
if we're going to choose a zone, we should be specific about
well,
that.
as we try to do more and more mixed use housing and whatnot, it only complicates the issue in my mind. So, and Frank doesn't like it anyway. So, there we go.
But I think we should acknowledge that downtown State Street and Milpa Street are places where people gather, and we need to look carefully at those areas.
And just a quick note to the audience before we adjourn, we will be forwarding the recommendations, as squishy as some of them may be, to council for further discussion. There will be a full hearing at council before anything goes into any kind of effect I would please suggest that you follow along with the announcements for the meeting. Certainly, most of you have my email address. I know that for sure. And I'll be glad to share whatever the dates and times of those suggestions are going to be as we try to bring this thing home. So,
Is there, Ms. Johnson, a sense that it's going to be next month or 3 months from now so that the audience would know now?
I think it would probably be a few months for us to look at ordinance language for the areas we've already confirmed and covered, and then bringing back some maps and just some more analysis of different areas for if we look at sidewalks and paseos.
Thank you.
all right, very good. Well, thank you all very much for your participation today and your comments, and we take them all very seriously. And we stand adjourned. Thank you.